Hi everyone, and welcome to week 8 and chapter 8 of our discussion on management. And this week we dive into and focus on what's known as the foundations of individual behaviour. So we're focusing on people as individuals and all the things that make up the different aspects of how we might think about managing them. So we start off by looking at what do we mean by the idea of organisational behaviour, which is often abbreviated as OB, which is a whole field in management and in organisational studies. So we're kind of diving into a little bit of it. We're going to have a look at the role of attitudes. We're then going to have a look at personality, and then we'll look at perception and how how perceptions are influenced. Then we'll have a look at some learning theories and how they shape behaviour, and then dive into a couple of issues that are kind of more current in organisational behaviour. So let's dive in this video to a bit of an overview of what we mean by organisational behaviour. So generally speaking, we can think of organisations like an iceberg. So the idea of an iceberg is that we have these things that are above the surface that we can see and are more visible, but then under the surface there's a whole lot of stuff that is invisible to us. And so we can think of these things that sit above the surface as things that we can actually observe. So what are the strategies of the organisation, the organisation's objectives, things like the structure, so how is it organised, all these kinds of things. But then there's all this stuff that happens under the surface that are a little bit more difficult to see and to understand. And these are things like people's attitudes, how they perceive things that are happening in the organisation, the way that groups work. So we looked at this last week when we looked at our group behaviour and the way that groups work together, the ways that people interact, and any of the interpersonal stuff that happens. So we're sort of looking generally at these two factors combined and trying to understand, are these things aligned? Are any of them working in conflict? And how do we just manage all these different aspects? So we think of organisational behaviour at 3 levels as well. So we think of it in terms of individuals, so the actual people that are in the organisation. And this is what we're looking at this week, so their attitudes, etc. Last week we looked at people at a group level, so in terms of teams and groups, and the aspects of behaviour that are influenced by people in a group at a group level. And then we can also think of organisational behaviour from an overall organisational aspect. And this tends to be the stuff that's a little bit more visible because it's often written down. So we'll have our organisational structure, which is what we looked at a few weeks ago when we looked at how is the organisation organised in terms of, say, an organisational chart and the team structures and things like that. What is the organisation's culture and any policies that they have around how people are managed within the organisation, as well as the day-to-day work practices. So are they informal, formal? How are things actually done in the organisation? So we just want to be thinking about that from those 2 levels. You might think of them as sort of interlaced clusters where we have individuals, groups, and then the organisation as a whole. So when we're thinking about organisational behaviour, the overall objectives of a good OB practice or understanding our individual, group and organisational levels of behaviour is, first of all, to be able to understand the productivity in the team, both at an individual team and whole organisation level. So are people working efficiently and effectively? And you'll remember those terms back from about week 1, which is where we're trying to see, are we doing the right things, and are we doing the right things well? We also want to reduce absenteeism and its sort of cousin, which is called presenteeism. So absenteeism being when people just take a sickie, don't come to work for whatever reason. And presenteeism is where they do show up to work, but they're sort of not doing anything and they're just showing up to sort of look good or, to be paid, but then they're not actually performing. And we also want to be able to manage our turnover in a way that is effective and efficient as well. So generally speaking, low turnover is preferred. So what we want to do is keep good employees and keep employees that are productive and satisfied, and minimise that transition of staff, because it can be quite disruptive to the organisation and to the, as well as obviously impacting those people if they either leave the organisation or we ask them to leave. So we also have these two ideas of organisational citizenship behaviour, which is where we want people to actually act in a way that is what we might consider good within the organisation. So this means that they're helpful, they promote effective function in the organisation, so they just sort of act like a decent person and contribute to the overall behaviour of the organisation, in the same way that, you know, you might think about being a good citizen means you follow the rules and you don't, you know, act in ways that are detrimental to your community. In a similar way, we think about this in terms of employees within an organisation, not acting in ways that are harmful and trying to act in ways that are helpful and contribute to the organisation. And then we have the notion of job satisfaction, which I'm sure has an intuitive meaning for you, which is this, that people's level of attitude that they think their job is good and that they enjoy that work, and it has a level of satisfaction for them, either in terms of the work conditions, their career progress, the work-life balance, or whatever it is. And we also want to involve or reduce in incidents and aspects of workplace misbehaviour. So these are things that are actually harmful or detrimental to the organisation or the people within the organisation. So deviance is anything that is sort of away from established norms and has a detrimental effect. Aggressive behaviour, antisocial behaviour, violence, these kinds of aspects that would contribute to harm within the organisation. So that covers off our intro to the idea of organisational behaviour, or OB. Next, there'll be a series of videos. Some of them will be from YouTube, some of them will be from me, where we look at the three components of an attitude. So what does an attitude actually mean and what are the elements of it? And then diving into what are some of the different types of attitudes that employees might hold. So I'll catch you after the next video.